You're listening to Thrive, your agency resource, the only podcast of its kind for creative, media, and technology leaders who are ready to dive deeper into consciousness, leadership, and agency growth. I'm your host, Kelly Campbell. This year, Thrive is brought to you by E2M Solutions, a trusted white label partner to hundreds of digital agencies across the globe. Visit e2msolutions.com/thrive today. Welcome back to another episode of Thrive. The art of selling is fundamentally about developing mutually beneficial relationships. We all know this, or we should know this because we've been in business for a while. Today, I'm joined by founder and CEO of Sales Maven, Nikki Rausch. With 25 years of sales experience and a background in neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, Nikki helps small business owners approach business development by focus on relational authenticity. Nikki, thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this because I'm a total nerd about business development and the relationality of that. So just really, really excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm very excited to be here with you too.
So we've covered a lot about sales, all different nuanced aspects of sales and business development and all of that for agencies on the show over the last 156 episodes. I'm curious about your take on this from that relationality standpoint. I think people often miscategorize or have an interesting mindset around sales, right? It's like, I'm selling a thing, I have to convince someone to buy a thing. It's not about that at all. And once you figure that out, sales and business development become a whole lot easier. So can you talk a little bit about your take on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that there's a misconception about what the intent of selling is. There's been so much people who've done it so poorly where they think that, like you said, that sales, your job is to convince somebody. Well, frankly, in this day and age, none of us want to be convinced of anything. It kind of goes against, it makes us put our guard up. And so one of the misconceptions is that people think sales is something you're supposed to do to another person. And I say sales is something you're supposed to do with another person. It's a collaborative conversation, really, that does this person have a need, a want, and desire? Do I have a solution that might meet that need, want, and desire? And if not, that's okay. We can bless and release and just move on. Or if you do have a solution that meets that, can you put it in a way, can you deliver it in a way that is going to resonate with the person you're in the conversation with? Mm-hmm. So my whole approach to sales is relationship first, rapport always.
I love that. So I mentioned during the introduction, neuro-linguistic programming. For those of the audience who are not familiar with NLP, can you talk about what that is, number one, and then how that's used in that business development context?
So NLP, the neuro part, is how we process information in our brains. Linguistics is language. So language, it kind of encompasses not only how you speak to others and how they speak to you, but also any internal dialogue you've got going on during that conversation. And then the programming part is about habits and patterns. So it's really the study of communication. And I often say that NLP, the way I teach it and the way I approach it with sales and business development, has to do with my all-time favorite quote, which is, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape." What NLP does and brings to a conversation is it allows for you to be flexible and still be genuine in a conversation, to put the other person at ease, to make it easier for them to be in conversation with you. So from a business development standpoint, how you can bring NLP into a conversation is, think about when you meet somebody who has a very similar style to you and you feel that instant connection. It's easy to be in conversation with those people, right? And a lot of times you could be in a conversation with somebody and you could feel like 10 minutes has passed and you look at your watch and you're like, oh my gosh, we've been talking for 2 hours. It just, like, time just disappears, right? And those are easy conversations to have. But on the flip side of that, on the other side of the spectrum, there's people that you meet that have a very different style than you. And it can feel like a struggle to be in conversation with them. And a 10-minute conversation with that person can feel like a 2-hour conversation. It can feel like I need a nap after that 10 minutes because it's so different. But realistically, you don't always know when you are doing business development, are you going to come into contact with people who are just like you? or are you going to come into contact with people who have a very different style than you?
Mhm.
And if you really want to scale your business, you have to be able to adjust to make yourself and the other person more comfortable in the conversation so that we can find out, do we have a mutually beneficial partnership here, or should, again, we part ways?
Yeah, I love that you specifically said find a way to make yourself and the other person more comfortable. Because if it's
Yeah.
just making the other person comfortable, then we tend to shrink. We tend to not show up authentically, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
might even commit to things that we don't intend to commit to, right? And
Yeah.
that is a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I love the fact that you said that. So it is about your own comfort in that conversation. So you are genuine and natural, and also trying to read what is going to resonate most with this other person. So it's almost like tracking people, having the ability to track the nuances of people, which is a really difficult thing to teach. So let's set a little bit of framework here. I know that you've got
Okay.
lots and lots of structures and frameworks that are really helpful for a lot of this. So you focus a lot on process when we talk about the discovery call. Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about some of the process that you follow or that you teach as it relates
Yeah.
to that?
So I have a signature framework for sales, and I call it the selling staircase. And there's 5 steps in that to have a successful sales conversation. Step 3 is the discovery. So once you get to step 3, we're in a conversation. Your job in the discovery process is to ask really smart questions that uncovers, does this person have a problem, a need, or a want? And also, by the way you frame your questions, you start to plant seeds in the mind of the other person that, oh my gosh, Kelly knows something, or Kelly has something, or can help me in some way, that allows them to start being like, okay, I'm in, like, I'm interested to know, like, what's this next step? What are ways that we can work together? So the discovery process, the way to set it up successfully is there's a few things. You need to pre-frame at the start of your call, and I'm happy to go into as much detail as you want here. So we've got to pre-frame the start of the call. That sets the stage for what's going to happen, and it creates safety. And safety is so important in any type of business development conversation, because if your client or prospect doesn't feel safe, they go into fight, flight, or freeze. And it's really hard to earn somebody's business and put them in a place where they'll even be revealing and share with you what they need. So pre-frame to create safety. Then you ask really smart questions that lead the person down the path to going like, oh, okay, I'm in, I want to hear more. I'm interested to know like what your offers are, things like that. And then once you get to the set of questions, the thing that you want to do here is you want to go through your whole set list of questions, or at least the ones that you need in order to understand, is there a problem, a need, and want? Do I have a solution for them? And what I mean by that is, one of the mistakes that people make in a business development call is they'll ask a question, they'll let the prospect answer, and they'll go, oh, I have a solution, and they'll start selling. And then they'll ask another question, person will answer, and then they'll sell something else. And that really muddies the water. So you got to keep this part of the conversation really clean. You go through your set list of questions, and then when it makes sense, you ask permission to move to the next step in the process, which for me is where you start to lay out your offers. I call it proposal.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. So that's not different from how sales should be done. It's just put in a framework that most people don't think about. They don't take the
Mm-hmm.
time to actually separate these things out, especially not step one. Step one is fascinating to me because what you're actually talking about, given my work in the world, is you're talking about making sure that you are not activating a trauma response in the prospect, right? The fight,
Yeah.
flight, or freeze is a trauma response.
Yes.
So creating that safety here, we're talking about psychological safety
Mm-hmm.
from the get-go. What are some specific ways, examples that you've used or that you teach how to do that?
So, one of the things that you want to do first and foremost is you want to establish rapport at the beginning. So, you want to show that you're there to have a real conversation, not just talk at somebody, because we're all so sick of being talked at.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that you do is you check in with them to make sure that this is what the intent is for them too. So I always say at the beginning, Kelly, thank you so much for taking this time to chat with me today. The purpose of our call is, and then I would state the purpose. So that starts to create safety right there. And then I say, and we're scheduled to chat for about 25 minutes. Does that still work for you? Because the one thing I don't want is the other person going, I really only have 20 minutes. And then I have to leave. I've got to go pick the kids up from school, or I've got to go move to my next meeting, or whatever it is. If they're spending their time thinking about, should I tell Nikki this or should I wait? They're not paying attention to what the conversation, they're worried about, like, should I say something? Should I not? And so it also shows a respect of their time by you asking, does that still work for you? And then they're going to say yes or no, or, they'll tell you an honest answer.
Right.
Then the next thing that you say is you set yourself up to now take the lead in the conversation. And you have to take the lead by pacing the other person first. So this is a very NLP concept. You got to pace before you lead, because one of the mistakes that people make in a sales conversation is they try to just lead. So if I came up to you on the street, I mean, you and I are just meeting, Kelly, so I don't know that much about you, but if I came up to you on the street, grabbed your hand and said, come with me, you'd probably say, let go of my hand. No, thank you. I don't know who you are. Maybe you'd be like, I'm all in. I don't know. But most people would say, like, slow down, lady. I don't know you. I'm not going anywhere with you. But if somebody came up to you and really kindly said, Kelly, is there any chance that you would walk over here with me and see if this would be something you'd want to check out? You might say yes, right? So the next part of the conversation is to say, now, in order to make this time meaningful and productive for you, is it okay if I start with a couple quick questions versus just launching into questions, right? Ask permission, show respect to the other person, and state it for their benefit, not for yours. Because if you say to them, now, in order for me to earn your business, I need information from you, they're going to go like, no, thanks. That doesn't feel safe. But in order to make it meaningful and productive, is it okay if I start with a couple quick questions? Now it sets the stage of what's going to happen next. Most people will say yes to that unless they're on a time crunch, or unless they're like, look, I just want to know what's your price, right? And that can happen too, but be willing to ask permission, because if you ask permission, most of the time people are going to say yes to it.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said at the very top of the show related to flexibility.
Okay.
We can only control our side of the street, right?
Yep.
So we do have to be flexible, because we're going to be on, maybe not on the receiving end, but in relationship in some way, shape, or form with prospects who may operate very differently from us, as you said before. What are some ways, like to your point, if someone is trying to race to zero and, hey, I'm here, I don't have time for all these questions, just like, what's your number? I mean, for me, I would be like, okay, it's just not a good fit for me. Like, that would be enough to give me information that we were misaligned. However, that may not be the case for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Different people have different values. So in that flexibility, when we are met with people who don't really have time to go through our process, they're just looking for a price.
Mm-hmm.
How would you sort of shift the way that you're showing up in that conversation?
The way that I would shift is, well, first of all, I'm a believer that if somebody asks you a question, you should be able to answer it. Now, whether or not you want to answer it, or how you answer it, that's your choice, right? So if somebody asks me a question about price and they go, I just want to know your price, then I would say, okay, prices range between, and I would say a number, right? So for me, prices range anywhere from $147 a month to $10,000. In order to give you a specific price that would be meaningful for you, is it okay if I ask you a couple quick questions and then we can narrow it down? So now I'm pacing you again. So I'm pacing you to, like, here's your answer. And are you willing to go a little further with me so I can give you a more specific answer? And if you say yes, great. And if they say no, then I would say, thank you so much for your time. I wish you well.
Yeah.
And I'm ending the conversation too.
Right. And in, the line of work that agencies are in, regardless of what specific vertical service offering they are, sometimes it'll be impossible. Most of the time, it'll be impossible to give a price, even with asking a few questions on a discovery call, right? Because we're just discovering what the problem is. We're not going into solution orientation. We're not giving specific prices on scopes that we can't define yet. So what I hear you saying is that, like, give a wide range that kind of ironically doesn't mean anything
Yeah.
because that's the point, you know. And the other thing that I do sometimes is I use and teach this sometimes with my clients is I like to use the higher number of the larger end of the spectrum in terms of the cost, that, you know, what's the spectrum that we're talking about, that range, the higher number first, because what happens is a lot of people are going to hear the first number and attach to that, right? So when you just said that, I heard $147. Now I'm kind of attached to that as the prospect. So if you give me a proposal for $600, it's like, wait, I thought it was going to be 147. So I've reversed those. So same concept, but just putting the larger name. Sometimes it's between, or working with me looks like $10,000 to 147. I don't know what that looks like for you yet. I've got to, you know, gather some more information. Is that okay? But they hear the 10,000 and then they get the proposal for, let's say, 6,000, and all of a sudden it's, oh, well, it's not 10, right? So just a different way to think about that. But yeah, I'm always curious how people, because that's a question that we get often, right? I'm sure you get that
Yeah.
from folks who you work with all the time. What if people just want a price? Should I even bother talking with them?
Well, and it depends on your service and what you offer and whether or not you can just say, this is the price, or we need to go a little bit deeper to understand scope in order to give a real price. And what you just did is you anchored the higher price. So that totally makes sense. The way that, so just to give you some clarity around how I do it with the 147 to 10,000, I never explain what they get for 147. I always start at the higher price and explain what they get here, and then you move your way down. So you anchor the higher price, and that's known as top-down selling. And the reason that you do that is because people don't like to give things up. We have attachment, like in our society, we're easily attached to things. So if you start at the higher price and then you work your way down, the client is much more likely to pick something that is a better fit for them versus just go for the least expensive thing. But if you start at the bottom, they're more like to say, well, I have to pay more to get more. It's different than I have to give things up in order to save money. It's a very different mentality.
That is definitely a different mentality. Yeah, for sure. Hey, let's take a quick break. Did you know that there's a better way to scale your agency? Whether it's web design, development, e-commerce, content, SEO, or even hosting, E2M is the reliable white label partner you wish you knew about years ago. Personally, I'm proud to partner with E2M because of our alignment in values and ethics. Head over to e2msolutions.com/thrive to learn more. Now, let's get back to the show. Can you also talk a little bit about inside of the selling staircase? One of the other steps I think you talked about was curiosity. Is
Mhm.
that part of all of this, is just the information gathering?
So I mentioned there are 5 steps, and just really quickly, I'm just going to say what they are, and then you'll understand where curiosity falls. So step 1 is introduction. Step 2 is curiosity. Step 3 is discovery call. Step 4 is proposal. Step 5 is close. Curiosity is the most missed step in the sales conversation. I count it as number 2. The intent behind creating curiosity is if you don't know how to create curiosity, oftentimes you miss out on even getting to have a conversation with a prospective client. So I don't know how much time you or how much you want me to go into this. So you tell
Yeah,
me,
sure.
Kelly,
We can
please.
talk about it.
Okay. So creating curiosity, when I teach it, I often teach it as it's the difference between how you call a dog versus how you call a cat, which I know sounds a little crazy. So stick with me for just a second. So Kelly, are you a dog or a cat lover or
I
both?
own a
Or
dog. I've
okay.
never had a cat.
Okay. So, if you want to get your dog's attention, a lot of times you'll change your demeanor a little bit. You'll change your voice and you'll be like, come here, boy, come here. Right. And dogs really respond to that energy. They're like, oh, something fun's going to happen. I'm
Get
totally,
the
and they
treat.
don't even know what's going to happen and they're in. Right. But when we show up in a sales conversation, a lot of times, or even in any conversation with somebody, and we think they're a prospective client, so business development again, we tend to show up with dog calling energy. We're like, "Oh my gosh, I have something that's going to change your life. It's going to help you." And people go like, "Oh," they
Whoa.
push away. They're like, "Dog calling energy, it's too much." So on the flip side, if you want to call a cat, and I know you said you never owned a cat, so that's okay, but a lot of times you hear people do this thing where they go, "Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty." Now, cats don't even come to that a lot of times. They might give you a look like what? And that's all you need to start to get somebody's attention. So I always say, creating curiosity is having responses that are a little bit of a here kitty kitty type of response that lets somebody go, what does that mean? Tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that goes into it, but just from a really simple, just getting started. And I do think creating curiosity, it's like building a muscle. You got to work it before it builds up. So the easiest way to start to work it is to think about, how do you answer the most basic question right now? And a basic question that you probably have been asked. I'm suspecting, I mean, we're early into the week, but you've probably been asked this a couple times already this week is, hey, Callie, how are you? Right? Super common question. That is an opportunity for you to start to create some curiosity in how you answer it. If you have an answer like, fine, how are you? Or good, how are you? That doesn't create any curiosity.
Right.
But if you have an answer like, oh my gosh, I'm great. I'm just about to record my 156th episode of my podcast. That allows somebody to go, you have a podcast? What's your podcast about? What does that mean? 156 episodes. Where do you find that? Right now, it opens the door to talk about something that maybe is interesting to you.
Yeah.
Now, don't say something that you don't want to talk about. But if there is something you want to talk about, and maybe Kelly, you've got some great new offer coming out, you might say, ooh, I've been working on something new and I'm super excited to launch it to my group. Somebody's going to go, what does that mean? Tell me more about that. Do I need that? Maybe, right? So it's just learning how to open doors to allow the other person to ask you a question, to follow up on something that you say. And so again, we can go as deep as you want in this. I have a whole course on creating curiosity, but it is such an important piece, because if you don't create curiosity, the other person you're in conversation, a lot of times, they don't know anything about you. They don't know what to ask you about. They don't know what they would even be interested in. So you have to plant these little seeds, and then we're just looking to see which pops, like which comes to the surface.
Yeah, back to your example question about, I get asked all the time, we're on calls like this or other kinds of calls for different businesses that I own, what have you. Everyone's like, hey, how are you doing today? That kind of like very, very sort of our default, I would call that, right? One of the things that I love to do, which I'm glad you brought this up as an example, is not ask that question, but ask a different question, right? Like, hey, what's lighting you up this week?
Yeah.
Right? Or what's one thing that surprised you yesterday? Right. And so people are kind of like caught off guard in a really positive way with
Yes.
questions that are leaning into the curiosity that you're talking about. It all comes down to relationality.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, I'm genuinely curious to know what something interesting was that happened yesterday or this week, so that we can develop that rapport. So, and that's just natural, but that doesn't come naturally to everyone. For
That's
some
true.
people, it will feel forced. So I think it's, and I'm assuming that you would agree, it's really just practice. It's kind of moving a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So I think this is great, Nikki. I know you also have a very, very generous offer for our audience. So I'll let you talk about that for a minute, and then we'll make sure to put the link to that.
Thank you so much. So I do have a gift for your audience. It's called Mastering the Sales Conversation. It's a training, and it actually goes through all 5 of the steps. It goes a little deeper in the creating curiosity, a little bit deeper on the discovery process, definitely goes into the other 3 steps that we haven't even covered. So I would love to give that to your audience. You can go watch it. It's completely free, and go grab it. You can get it by going to yoursalesmaven.com/thrive.
Perfect. So again, we will put that in the show notes for all of you. Thank you so much, Nikki. This has been a great conversation. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Me as well.
And thank you for joining us. If you liked this episode, please rate the show or subscribe wherever you watch or listen. And a big thank you to the official sponsor of Thrive for this year, E2M Solutions, your white label agency partner. Learn more about their approach, services, and subscription plans at e2msolutions.com/thrive.